Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Clayton Speaks' third online Zoom forum. This version features young youth panelists from the community and has a topic of diversify our narrative. This is meant to be a continuation of the discussion started at the Black Lives Matter protest back in June in our Clayton Community Center. And the outpouring of support and interest and progress was tremendous. And so we are eager to continue that discussion on diversity in our community. My name is Casey Montgomery, and I'm a junior at Clayton Valley. I have lived in Clayton for 5 years. My passion for diversity and inclusion comes from my experiences in the community, at my school, with friends. My experiences have shown me how easy it is to be racially and culturally insensitive. And there are a number of encounters I could detail. Once, me and my friends found swastikas and Klan hate speech in our town center. Or another time, a friend whispered KKK in my ear as a joke. Or once, a boy at my school, addressing our lunch table, looked me right in the eyes and declared, "Raise your hand if you believe your grandparents own Casey's." It's hard, honestly, to describe the feeling of shame and embarrassment that you would experience in that moment. It's the moment that you are irrevocably painted other, and it's sad and scary. But in all of those situations, it would be easy to label it as just kids being kids, or see them as disconnected individual events. However, I strongly believe that they speak to a larger systemic issue. And that issue stems from a lack of education, a lack of positive exposure to racial diversity. And this is because as young people growing up, we're not given the chance to talk about the history of race in our country. We're not given the chance to candidly discuss its impact that it still has. We're not taught or given the chance to express our experiences, and we are not taught that every diverse story in our community is valid and worth being heard. And on that note, this is the first public discussion on race I've ever been a part of, or really ever heard of, and that's unfortunate. But it also makes me incredibly excited to be here and incredibly proud that my community is here with me. We have worked very hard to create a diverse panel tonight. All of these young people today have volunteered, and all of them have unique and important perspectives to share. And right after they introduce themselves in a moment, we will get into the discussion, which will begin by sharing personal experiences. Next, onto defining the problem we see in the community, as well as in a broader context. And then some solutions. A number of the young people here are actively working on projects, and I know we would love your support. And after that, we'll finally have a short Q&A. So if you have any questions or comments or feedback, feel free to jot them down or put them down in the chat. We will try our best to get through all of them in the last 15 or 20 minutes or so of the discussion. So without further ado, meet our panelists. Monica?
Hi, my name is Annika Tui, and I am a senior at Clayton Valley Charter High School.
Hi, I'm Ayana Broom, and I'm a junior at Clayton Valley High School.
Hi, my name is Jason Shin, and I'm a junior at Clayton Valley High School.
Hi, my name is Jordan Takietin, and I am a senior at Northgate High School.
Hi, my name is Jordan Tillman, and I'm a junior at Northgate High School.
Hi, my name is Kaylee Little. I'm a junior at the University of San Francisco, and I graduated from CV in 2018.
Hi, I'm Kendall Albert, and I'm a senior at Clayton Valley Charter High School.
My name is Nia Williams, and I'm a senior at Clayton Valley Charter High School. My name is Thomas Cook. I go to Berkeley as a freshman, and I graduated Clayton Valley last year.
Thank you, panelists, for being here and for sharing your stories with us. Before we get into the first section, we understand that these conversations are uncomfortable and difficult, and we just want to share a little bit about where we're coming from, the context and base of our discussion. We have 4 norms. The first one is be truthful. We understand that sometimes the kindest thing to do is to be bluntly honest. Second would be to have an open mind. This is a judgment-free zone. We don't subscribe to cancel culture, meaning everyone is in a different journey and we're all making progress, and we won't, as long as you're here engaging and honestly and genuinely wanting progress, we're happy you're here. Number 3 would be to engage. Engagement is the goal of this discussion, and as long as it doesn't matter if you don't know if you should say something, when in doubt, do. The best thing we can do is keep the conversation going. And on to the first section, personal experiences. My first question is to Jordan Tillman. How's it been like growing up in the Clayton community?
Growing up in the Clayton community, I have experienced racism my whole life. It started when I was in first grade. I had one of my friend's parents come up to me and tell me I could no longer play with their daughter because of the color of my skin. That night, I did try to go home and erase my skin. And the next day, when my friend got to class, she had told me exactly what her mom told me, and we decided that we didn't care. We were still going to be friends no matter what, and we are best friends to this day. When I went out to the playground, I realized there weren't many kids that looked like me. So being told you can't play with someone because of the color of your skin, you start to feel like an outcast. If there's no one that looks like you and you're not allowed to play with other kids that don't look like you, there's not really anybody to play with. The next thing that I can remember was an incident that happened where I work. I was coming out of the kitchen and I had a customer tell me, not to me personally, but he had said, "Niggers shouldn't work here." I walked past him, I had heard it, and I instantly went to the manager that night and explained to him what had happened. He was just as appalled as I was, but he wasn't sure how to handle the situation because he wasn't trained to handle that kind of situation. We later, I talked with the management and everything. We came to the conclusion that because there were no microphones on the cameras, we couldn't hear if he was saying it to me or just telling a story. I agreed with the decision we all came to, but I feel like it was kind of swept under the rug. Like there should have been more that they did, but there wasn't. The way they handled it was basically how anybody else would handle it. It's awkward to have racial conversations. I'm the only Black person that works there. And to go up to my white coworkers and tell them that this had just happened to me, it was even awkward for me to do that. And so I can understand how weird it felt to have to handle that situation when you're not trained to. Race is rarely talked about, let alone handled correctly. And going forward, I hope that I can help situations like these never occur. Thank you.
Thank you, Jordan. That was a little bit of a perspective of growing up and not looking like the people in your community. Annika, could you share your experiences on growing up as the majority?
Growing up as a white girl in a predominantly white town and attending predominantly white schools my whole life, I've had a drastically different experience, and I've had the privilege of not acknowledging the lack of diversity in my community. Last year, I took US history, and when we were online, I did a lot of my own studying for my AP test, not using our school's textbook, but looking things up online. And it was embarrassing how many times I found myself seeing something about a person of color in our history and thinking, I didn't know that. I've never learned that. I've never learned about that. And I think it's because throughout all of my years being in school, I've opened history textbooks and seen people who look like me. And they were always, the good guys in our history. And in all of my English classes, I've read books about people who look like me, written by people who look like me. And my coaches, my teachers, they've always looked like me. And when I was younger, I never thought anything of this. That was just my life. People looked like me. And more recently, I've begun to notice that's not how it is for so many people. And I can't even begin to understand the effects that has on a kid growing up. And that's why I'm here today. That's why this is something I'm so passionate about, why I want diversity in our community, because I grew up with this huge, huge privilege that I never even knew I had until a couple of months ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Annika. Yes, we have seen from two very different perspectives in the community, and one that might be a little blended. Ayana, what has it been like growing up in Clayton?
Growing up in a mixed family, I've always had kind of a diverse view on everything. I mean, I have a white mom, a black dad, so I hear different experiences, and I've always been kind of taught to look at both sides of it. I'm taught to be aware that I am half black and also look at the other side of the perspective that's white, And it's kind of been difficult because part of me feels like in different situations, I should honor my black side. Other times I feel like I should help my friend who may not understand something about being black. So it kind of pulls me both ways. And I think it was middle school, around 7th or 6th grade, I was with a couple of my friends, one who was white and one who was black. We were down at these tunnels down in downtown, and there's always a bunch of graffiti up, so we like to go down there sometimes to see the new graffiti that's put up there, because why not? And this one time that we went down there, there was, I don't remember specifically, but it was some sort of promoting the KKK. And my white friend who was there made somewhat of a joke and kind of laughed it off. And my black friend who was there was frustrated by it, was hurt by it. And I personally felt like I was kind of stuck in the middle because I didn't really know what to do. Because part of me really wanted to help my black friend and tell my white friend that that wasn't good. Because, I mean, part of me, I was hurt. It hurts for someone to laugh at that kind of thing. But also, the other part of me sympathized for my white friend who may not have had any malintent. She may have just been nervous by the situation. She could have just been uneducated on it and probably didn't realize how much of an effect that would have on me and my black friend that was there. So I want to be able to help people have open conversations about it so people are educated on the fact. Like, I don't want other people to feel like they're torn both ways and they have to pick a side. So, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayana. We've heard some great perspectives, but we would like to point out that this is not just a black and white issue. There's so much more, so many more factors that go into bias and prejudice in the community. With that, Jason, do you have anything to share about your experiences growing up?
Yeah, thank you, Casey. So I just want to start off with the following statements like, can you see me? Or your last name is funny, and chink, and go back to your country. These are all statements that I have or have witnessed people being called. It's not like these statements are unique or confined to outside our community. Rather, I hear these statements quite often all over our community. From Clayton Valley to Diablo View to downtown Clayton are the places that I've experienced the worst. I've had to endure this type of racism and ignorance for all my life, and it may have just been a statement like, those people look like you, or why do they talk weirdly? These statements mean something. Why are minority groups always referred to as those people? Whether racism is blatant or thinly veiled, it hurts the people it affects. There's a reason why I remember them, and why so many other Asians and other minorities I know have heard statements like or similar to these all throughout their lives. Several events pop up in my head when speaking about racism, which include whenever an Asian character on a movie or a television show pops up and eyes just wander to you. It's when you're playing sports and someone gives you a backhanded compliment like, "Oh, you play so well for an Asian." It's when you walk down the street in your neighborhood and people yell at you saying, "Look, it's coronavirus." It's when the President of the United States blatantly says racist statements like China virus, which instigate hate crimes towards Asians, and how you have to now fear going outside because of that, while others applaud and worship him because of statements like these. Tonight, I will be talking about my experiences and my opinions towards different subjects regarding diversity in Clayton. But mind you, this is not just all about me. While my experiences are important as an example of a person who has been racially targeted their whole life, the main goal is to help other minority groups living in our community and how they feel helpless in our city or even scared. It's about helping and speaking up against racism and combating it with our experiences to help others try to understand and empathize with our situation regarding racism and oppression. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Yes, there are so many impacts of racial discrimination and bias, and we've seen that tonight. But there's also even more factors, such as religion. There's just so many more. And Nia, do you have any stories about other forms of prejudice and race in your life?
Yeah. So hi, I'm Nia. I'm Black, white, and Jewish, and I'm also a member of the LGBTQ community. I've lived in the Clayton Concord area my whole life, and I never really saw a lot of people who looked like me. And then people from the outside have also never really known what race I am. I've been mistaken for Hispanic and, a number of other races, so I face discrimination from a few different angles. I've never been Black enough, and I've definitely never been white enough, but as a child, I never really thought about it much. I can very vividly remember my racial awakening, for lack of better words. It was actually in Clayton. I was at the pool. I was 7 years old, and I was hanging out with two girls who were about 5 years older than me. And I was complaining about how hot my feet felt on the pavement. And one of the girls turned to me and said, "Well, you're an N-word. Your ancestors were too, and they walked on coals, so why are you complaining?" And at the time, I did not understand the weight that this had and the impact that it would have on me. As I grew up and entered middle school, I started becoming more aware of these things. There was a kid in my history class who would come to school every day and antagonize me for being Jewish. He would carry around Mein Kampf and come to my desk and play videos of Jewish people being beheaded and draw swastikas on all of my notebooks and textbooks. In addition to this, there was a kid who I had rejected to date, who then started text messaging me, calling me the N-word and threatening to lynch me, and got all of his friends to do the same. More recently, I had a partner whose one of their parents was really racist. They got drunk at some point and began saying the N-word numerous times. And they just continued to say racially insensitive things towards Black people and the protests that were going on. And it got to the point where I was uncomfortable in my own relationship. In my 17 years of life, I faced similar things like this, whether it be discrimination in history class, jokes from people I don't even know, even a teacher who I had to deal with for 2 years targeting me for being Black. But in July, as the protests started, I was really frustrated. Everywhere I turned, I would see videos of people who looked like me, people who looked like my family, getting shot and murdered in the streets senselessly. And I really felt like there was nothing that I could do. But I saw these masses of people who had the same feelings as me and were doing something about it. And it really made me find my voice and realize the power that my story has. So over the summer, I started to turn my discouragement into my strength and use my voice as my weapon against discrimination and racism. I started an Instagram page for Clayton Valley students to talk about discrimination and educate each other on current events. And I started a few other school initiatives. I'm also working with a number of people on this panel to implement diversify our narrative at our school, which will get more inclusive texts mandated at our school so that students can see books written by people who look like them and books about people who look like them. And this panel right now is my biggest tool. It's a great place. I'm getting to use my voice and share my story and help find solutions for these issues so that other young people don't have to face these same problems. So I'm so grateful for all of you who are here and the rest of you on this panel. And yeah, that's my story. Thank you.
Thank you, Nia. Yeah, we just heard an awful experience that one of our speakers has had with anti-Semitism, and it definitely impacts the people it is meant to hurt, and it's awful. But on the other end of the spectrum, it can also be very hurtful to the people who are praised for the white privilege. Kaylee, you have a good perspective on this.
Hi, my name's Kaylee, and I've lived in Clayton for the majority of my life and gone to schools in Clayton for the majority of my education. And this is the environment that I first came into contact with racism and prejudice, but it wasn't always presented how I or other people thought it would or directed towards people of color. I remember in my sophomore history class, we were learning about World War II, and I mentioned something about concentration camps. And in response to my comment, the person behind me turned around or turned to face me and said, "Why should you care? You're basically Hitler's favorite. So he wouldn't have killed you anyways." And when he said this, I was hurt and offended, but I was also super confused. I mean, I was hurt because I felt like that person looked at my coloration and just assumed that I should support Hitler's actions, or at least not openly oppose what he had done because I had benefited from what had happened. But I was also offended because he judged me based solely on my physical appearance. I'm not Jewish, but I definitely could have been, and he wouldn't have known any better. And I am Slavic, which is another group that was murdered in concentration camps, and he didn't know that. So he didn't know that he was offending me. And I knew that this kid was joking and that he didn't actually mean to cause any harm, but I was still offended, and I didn't know how to tell him that because I felt like the offense to me was far less than it would be for a different person, and I didn't have the right to speak up and tell him that he had hurt my feelings. And I guess that's why one of the reasons why I'm here is just I want to be able to tell people that even if you aren't the recipient of the attack that's being told to you, you can still be offended on behalf of the people that are being targeted, and you can still speak up and speak out about their racist comments and actions. While Clayton Valley is a primarily white school, we do have a lot of people of color that are classmates and friends. And I knew that a lot of them lived in my own neighborhood growing up while I was in school, but I never see them around town. And it wasn't until I attended the Black Lives Matter rally in Clayton downtown that I kind of realized why that might be. And I could see my friends that I had gone to school with get up on the platform and just talk about how they'd been targeted and abused in school and classes. And I knew that I was there for that portion of their lives, and I just didn't know that they were suffering. But the number one thing that I learned at that rally was the fact that a lot of the people of color in this community feel afraid or uncomfortable or unsafe just existing in their hometown. And it's because people target them or follow them and just make them feel like they don't belong here. But that's why I'm here. I want to, with these board members, I want to create a better community and a better city where anybody from any background, race, religion, sexuality, gender can just come and feel welcome and not feel oppressed.
Thank you, Kaylee. Yes, it is such an encompassing issue, and jokes hurt. Even if it's done, even if it's not meant to hurt, even if it's ignorance, these things hurt. And Jordan, what is your first experience with discrimination?
So as a Middle Eastern Latino living in Clayton, I have truly understood the power of words. They say the quill can be stronger than the sword. However, on top of that, it's just as painful. Hate anesthetizes any humanity or judgment. It doesn't matter at what age. When I was 10 years old, I was first called the N-word. And unfortunately, for other people, that is much younger. However, no single person deserves to be called such an inflammatory and incendiary slur. When I was called this on the kickball field, I did not understand what this word meant. It seemed like an alien word from a foreign language. However, I didn't realize that this word was as American as it came. You can call it privilege. You can call it innocence. However, I call it the fact that hate is taught. If you ask any 3-year-old who the worst person in the world is, they'll probably say mommy or daddy because they don't let them eat ice cream for breakfast. They're not going to say their friend Jimmy or Tommy because they're a different color skin than them. This exemplifies how if we want to make substantial change outside of the classroom, we need to make substantial change inside of it. We must diversify our narrative in order to make a better tomorrow. We must diversify our narrative so that one day, even in California, an Asian family will not have to worry about being berated with racial slurs while eating dinner in the heart of Silicon Valley. We must diversify our narrative so that one day, even in liberal California, a Muslim woman will not have to worry about having her hijab pulled up by law enforcement. We must diversify our narrative so that one day, even in progressive California, an African American man can leave his house without the looming fear of whether he will be shot just because of the color of his skin. Despite its shortcomings, we live in the greatest state in this nation. We have great tenacity and rigor when we are trying to boost our economy and find the next technological revelation. We must look ourselves in the mirror and decide whether what we're doing right now is just. And until then, I'm going to keep fighting to do everything I can to keep this bigotry and hate from spreading. Thank you.
Thank you, Jordan. You are so right. Discrimination has been taught, and we need better education. Thomas, how have you seen discrimination? How have you been a witness in school and in your community?
Well, I've seen it for like the past 7 years, secondhand mostly because, I feel like it kind of just started in middle school. I was always on the other end of it, I kind of was a witness to it. I didn't actually experience it firsthand. But it was like brand new to me when I first saw it in, 6th grade. And then I was like, okay, this is just strange. It should go, it should pass next year. Then I saw it in 7th grade. Then I saw it in 8th grade. Then I saw it in 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade. Each like thing that I did, or every new event that I went to, every new friend group, every new sport that I did, I saw some form of just prejudice, bias, racism, xenophobia, misogyny, homophobia. I saw it like all. It's all there. So I've always seen it. And it kind of sickens me. It does sicken me. It's disgusting how it's so prevalent in our community and how people are so unaware of the fact that it is. I mean, people, I can't say, I don't feel comfortable saying half the things that people said, so I won't, because they're just vile and they're disgusting words that have been said to people. And I mean, just to give you one example, because I just feel like it's just, gross. One thing that like kept me from a sport in high school was I was just, I was in the area and I just hear this one person And he's talking about this one person who wants to join the team. And, you know, the person who wants to join is a gay man. And they say, I don't want that, you know, I don't want him on the team. You can, you know, fill in the words of what he said. But he said, I don't want him on the team. You know, I don't want him, I'm not comfortable being in the same locker room as him. Like, just things like that that are just said that, you know, people just allow and accept and just allow these things to continue, because if no one ever puts a stop to it, it just gets worse and worse and it just continues. It's just a repetitive cycle that has existed in our country, and it has existed in our community. And just because people don't recognize it, or maybe they do, but maybe they just don't care. And I feel like I'm coming here today because I want to make a difference. You know, I feel like we all want to, and I feel like that's the best way to make that difference is to stop it before it spreads, stop it before it grows. You know, actually making it a real issue and not just letting it slide, not letting those words slide because they're just messing around. You know, they're not words because they actually hold people down, whether it be their gender, sexual orientation, their race, no matter what. All these words that are said, you know, they just don't help anybody. They are demeaning, they're hurtful, and they just keep people subjugated, and they don't help the community as a whole. So that's why I'm here today. I want to make these words stop.
Thank you, Thomas. You're so right. Discrimination is prevalent and it's become repetitive. And often people aren't aware. They don't recognize it as often as they should. Kendall, how did you become aware?
So I want to start by saying that as a white girl in a predominantly white town, I've had the privilege to never experience racism. In fact, for most of my life, I feel like I've been raised to be ignorant about the issues that our society faces. There hasn't been a year I can remember that the American flag wasn't raised at my house or along the streets of downtown Clayton for the 4th of July. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with displaying the American flag, but I felt that there's a different kind of pride and patriotism that I was encouraged to believe in, and a kind of toxic pride and patriotism. In my classrooms, and even in Clayton as a whole, we've always focused on the positives and simply ignored the more negative aspects of life in America. Starting in elementary school, I learned that Columbus and other European conquerors were heroes who should be revered. I learned that racism began with slavery and ended with Martin Luther King. And this sort of pride and patriotism was toxic because it implied that everything horrible was behind us, that the past was bad, so the present must be great. And racism was honestly something that I wasn't encouraged to think about because my school and my community wanted me to believe that America is perfect. They didn't want me to cloud this ideal vision of America by teaching me about the problems that plague our society. We're all Americans and we're all from Clayton, but that doesn't mean we've had the same experience. Over the years, and mostly recently, I've seen just how different my experiences have been from my peers who are people of color or members of the LGBTQ plus community. I've heard many of my peers and classmates come forward and speak about the obstacles they faced or the harmful words they've heard. And when I learned just how pervasive and problematic racism is in our community, I knew that we needed to break down these barriers of understanding race. We needed to break down the idea that racism can't exist just because America is supposed to be a land of equality and opportunity. I was so upset that the education system and even my own household had fostered these misconceptions and had tried to raise me to be ignorant. And I wanted to be sure that others like me began to see our community and our society as it really is in reality, as opposed to what everyone wants it to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Kendall, and thank you everyone for sharing your narratives. That they were very powerful. Before we go into the second section, which is defining the problem, we want to propose a poll question to the audience. You'll have about 2 minutes to answer it, and it is, were you surprised by the stories you just heard? We'll show you the answers after this section. So, on to the first question. How would you define the issues of diversity and inclusion in our community? Why are they important to be addressed?
I'll take that one. I think the biggest issue lies in barriers. what I mean by that is you see all the time people talking at each other instead of talking to each other. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a generational barrier, but there's just this level of people not wanting to understand, not being willing to understand the other side. One of the greatest pieces of advice that I've ever gotten was from my mom. She told me, don't go into a conversation expecting to convince someone of something. You don't listen to the other person when you do that. And so oftentimes when you're talking about black or white or gay or straight or any other, political issue, there's just people not being willing to listen to the other side. So it's not a conversation, but it's a debate, and nothing changes when you're arguing. So I think that ultimately people need to educate each other and educate themselves and have better conversations rather than arguments.
So I believe that a big issue with diversity and inclusion is the just physical, just fact of just telling someone that there's a problem, because when we look at our society, it would be kind of hard to believe that there is a problem today when all you're being taught is Civil War, got rid of slavery, we're not racist, World War II, we defeated the Nazis, we're not racist, civil rights, we're not racist. So when you show people that people who look like them have done these great things, you kind of develop this sort of king can do no harm mentality. And when you do that, it makes it very, very hard for you to understand we're not racist. Why? We've conquered all that. That's in our past. So how could we're different from that. How could we be making the same mistakes as them? And we need to show them, we need to show people that these same things are happening today. And the problem with that is racism is very much like biology. It evolves. It has gone from a predominantly bullhorn type of racism to assertive dog whistle. So what I mean from that is bullhorn is people dropping N-bombs just willy-nilly, just waltzing around thinking it's okay. However, then you get this type of racism that is so much harder to detect, a dog whistle form, where instead of saying the N-word, you say things like thugs, urban. But what they're meaning when they're saying in these urban areas, these rioters, all that, what they're basically saying is these, and then you can finish the sentence. However, when you look at it, it's doing the same detriment to society as dropping the N-bomb. If not even worse, because it's harder to detect. So we need to educate people and show them that the same mistakes are happening today as before.
So when we started going over this question, I had some difficulty, thinking about how I would talk about, the racism I saw at sports. And it's just mainly because I kind of, I'm uncomfortable saying the things that they said. But I mean, just anything that you can imagine that they would say about any person of color or like any racist, like prejudice against someone, I can guarantee you it was said. But the main thing, like the main reason I didn't want to talk about, all this stuff was because of my own personal experiences in all my sports. I was called, faggot, like every, like, just for the first year, like that was kind of like just me. I was just faggot, faggot, and fag, like all these other terms. It's like these, like they push you down and they make you feel like like a bit of self-hatred, like you don't want to be yourself. And then this nickname that stuck with me for a little bit was Sunshine. I had no idea what it meant, but then I watched this football movie and there's a gay football player named Sunshine. So, hearing things like that and just, that just, those words, like they really do hurt in every single way, because it makes you not want to be yourself. It makes you want to change yourself. It makes you kind of self-loathe yourself in a way. It makes you want to force yourself to be a different person. And, like the biggest thing with this, what we're doing is we're trying to get rid of like this, exclusive, group that you have to be a part of, like this normal, group. You have to be this perfect human being, or like you have to fit into this certain category of people. And it's just untrue. There is no perfect human being. Everyone has their own, their own, perfection, and they all have their own individualities. But in our community, we try to make people this certain way, and it's just sickening because nobody really acknowledges it. But these words continue again and again and again. And I don't think there's like a single year where I didn't like experience homophobia in some way. It's always there. It has never gone away. It is always there. There's no way to get rid of it besides to stop it from the start. And that's why we're here. We're just trying to get rid of it, because if it doesn't stop now, the people who grow up feeling this way are going to pass it down, and then they're going to pass it down, and then they're going to pass it down, and it's just a repetitive cycle. It's just gross, and that's why we're here. We just want to stop this cycle before it continues again.
Thank you, Thomas and Jordan and Nia. You're so right. We've seen how it affects individuals, how prevalent this issue is. It's hard to talk about. It makes you uncomfortable. And a lot of the times people aren't very willing to listen. We're here because we want to stop the problem where it starts, and education is the key to that. And with that, we want to ask, what does it mean to say diversifying narrative? What role does school play in bias or exclusion minorities?
I can take that one. To me, when you say diversify our narrative, it means to rewrite history. We need to change it. The generation before us didn't change it. The generation before them didn't, and the generation before them did it. If we keep tumbling down this cycle of hate and prejudice and discrimination, it's always going to continue, and it's never going to get better. You know, I want to be the person that changes it. Like Jordan said, hate is not learned, it is taught. You go home to your parents and they tell you Black people are bad, or Middle Easterners are terrorists. All of that hatred that you grow up with is just going to keep getting passed down to your kids, to their kids, and to their kids. It won't stop unless we do something about it now. I've only had one Black teacher in my life. That was freshman year. I've never had any other Black figure in my life that developed me other than my parents and my family. It's very difficult growing up without seeing somebody that looks like you in a setting that you are always in. We're at school 180 days out of the year. We are in their classes every single day for 5 days a week. And to sit there and not see anybody that looks like you teaching kids that don't look like you, it hurts and it's confusing. You can look in the mirror and see yourself, but when you go into a classroom and you don't see yourself, you start to get confused on why you are even there. Like I said earlier, I tried to erase my skin because I couldn't fit in, and people said I couldn't play with them because of the color of my skin. We need to figure out a way to make the curriculum and schools more diverse. That means more Black teachers, not even Black, just more teachers that don't look like the average population of the school. We need to change that somehow so other kids later on in the future don't feel the same way I did, and it needs to start younger. We're all 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, however old we are, and we're talking about it now. The kids younger than us, I don't want them to have to go through the same thing we all went through. We need to figure out a way to change it at a younger age and teach them that it is not okay to be racist and discriminate against people that do not look like you. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, these are the poll results for the question we just asked, which was, were you surprised by the stories you just heard? And 23% said yes, 46% said no, and 31% said somewhat. So it seems like a good majority are not surprised, and I think that speaks volumes. We're aware that there's an issue in our community, and that's why we're all here tonight. So, thank you. Sorry, Annika, you were saying?
Oh, no worries. I want to go off what Jordan said. Somebody from my church a while ago, she's an older generation, and she asked me if I thought that our generation was going to be the one to end racism. And I think, similar to what Jordan said, we have to teach it, or we have to teach kids to not be racist. People have to grow up learning about people of color, about other people, because again, just like she said, we're all 16, 17, however old we are. And I know that I didn't start learning about this until within the past few months. And it's so important that we grow up learning this, because if we don't start teaching younger kids now, the same thing is going to happen. Some of them are going to reach our age, and then maybe they'll understand that there's a problem and they'll try to fix it. But if we don't teach them at a younger age, it's the same continuous pattern that we're living in and we've been living in. And that's why our generation cannot end racism unless we teach younger generations to not be racist. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I had a different perspective on this question that revolves more around the idea of education. And for me, the idea of diversifying your narrative is really about bringing the voices of the oppressed and the silenced into our education. Because for too long, the American school system has focused on using the voice of the white man to talk about natives and minority communities. But when this happens, it's really easy to skew information or dehumanize a group just because of the words or the language or how you're depicting a group. But if that same group were to try to describe themselves, their daily actions or beliefs may seem really normal. And it's just because of how the current narrative is showing these groups that we have the perspectives that we do about them. And if we were to incorporate readings or literature written by the Black community or the LGBTQ community or Indigenous cultures, we would see that a lot of this narrative would even out, and we would remove kind of this idea that America and the white people have been this kind of hero and a savior to less fortunate communities, and we would be able to actually see both sides of the story. And I think that's something that's really necessary in our education right now.
I think one of the biggest disconnects in our education system is that there's sort of a conflict between assimilation and diversity. In our schools and communities, we often suppress the voices of marginalized groups by advocating for assimilation rather than recognizing and appreciating diversity. And I think that diversifying our narrative means leaving behind those ideas, that ignoring our differences in the name of assimilation is a solution to solving inequity.
Thank you. Yes, you all are so right. We need to grow up in deliberately inclusive spaces. We need to deliberately diversify the stories we tell and remember in education, in our families, and in the broader community. And on that, the next question is, what other places in the community need to own this issue? What role may sports, law enforcement, businesses, etc., play in perpetuating bias and exclusion?
I'll take that one as well. There definitely needs to be a change in schools, businesses, sports for sure. I remember one day at a track meet, one of my teammates finished his race and he got off the track and these Black kids walked up to him and said, "Wow, you're really fast for a white dude." He wasn't white. And he took that into offense because based off of the color of your skin or our skin, we already have a built-up prejudice on how that person is supposed to perform in a sport. We all heard, hopefully we've heard of the movie, White Man Can't Jump. That's not true. We need to be able to, recognize that racism happens and comes in all forms and that it needs to change. Sports, businesses, like I said, schools. I'm Black, I'm a woman, I'm bi, and I want to be in the FBI. something's got to change. Either I'm going to do that from the outside or from the inside of the justice system. But back to the sports, it's everywhere. It's not talked about because it's considered entertainment. They're there, they're making money, it's for us. If they didn't like it, they would have stopped it. But it needs to stop now.
I totally agree when referring to your problems and discrimination regarding sports. I remember I was on the Clayton Valley soccer team, and I was one of the 2 Asians there out of like maybe 60 to 70 players. And I remember my teammates never let me forget it. They just said comments like, "You're pretty good for an Asian," which is such a backhanded compliment. Like, why are Asians considered like just making that a focus point? And also when people refer to me, it's always like, "Wait, you guys look the same." Can you hear me better? Sorry. But I always got singled out with me and this other Asian person. We always got referred to. We always look the same, you know, just that Asian stereotype. And even the coach, he said, I remember he was saying how, "Remember to open your eyes, Shin, referring to my last name." It's just that Asian stereotype where we have small eyes, and the fact that the coach said that, and he may have not meant it as racist or something like that, but just the fact that he said that. And I know those statements are not safeguarded to just the soccer team, because I remember Jordan and Thomas speaking about the track team and how racist it is. And also, I'm sure it's all over every sports team in Clayton Valley.
I just want to say, because we're talking about businesses, I wanted to go back to what Jordan said about when she was working at her restaurant. Her manager didn't really know what to do. And I feel like businesses all over the place, all over our community, there has to be some change in that. And I feel like we have to implement this where all businesses know exactly what to do and they have a set protocol of what to do. Because if not, it's going to happen again. And, you know, they're just going to go off what they think is right. And then in Jordan's situation, unfortunately, nothing really was done. And that's unfortunate because it also allows it to happen again in the future. So with businesses in the first place, I think there has to be, you know, from the city, there has to be some way that we can implement this where businesses have to follow the set protocol where they can actually, you know, make this, you know, community a safer place for all workers and all people to actually have a safe environment where they work. And with sports, you know, we've been talking about that. It's, you know, it's hard to be inclusive and, you know, accepting if these issues and prejudices are buried deep down, especially for each individual. So I feel like that change has to be made from, you know, the coach. You know, Jason, I'm sorry to hear about your coach saying that, but I mean, if coaches need better training and they need to understand, you know, this has to be from the school. You know, the schools need to implement this, but they need to teach the coaches how to be better coaches and to be more inclusive and to be more aware of what's going on. For law enforcement, I feel like that's the same thing with businesses. There has to be better training for this, and it should be treated just as any other business, but much more stricter because they are, you know, they have to protect this community. Like we can't just allow this to continue. We have to make sure that they have the best training possible so that, you know, nothing bad happens, you know, like they need to be set at the highest standard. So I feel like we need to make that happen as well. Make sure that law enforcement also gets the training they need.
So when I look at other places in the community that need to own this issue, we have seen that it's in law enforcement, sports, businesses. However, I believe that it is even more rooted in our society with the very way that we talk. George Orwell once said that the devolution of society will be correlated with the devolution of the English language. We have become so reliant on repeating and parroting phrases that we hear. There are benign ones like swan song, last dance, I guess the shoe's on the other foot. However, then there are more detrimental phrases like drain the swamp, build the wall, make America great again. On the surface, these sound amazing. However, they lack very substance. They have very little plan to, know how they're going to do this. So if you play into this ideology that has very little substance just on the surface without knowing any other detail, you then realize that what you were thinking you were getting, you end up getting undercut. And we need to pay attention more to what we are saying and to what we are hearing, because I believe, and this is a perfect example, Charlie Kirk of Turning Point USA said, I don't agree with this. America is the least racist and most decent country in the world. Now, I don't agree with this. However, in that very statement, he said the least racist. However, then his own supporters say racism is gone. Racism is dead. However, the head of that organization just said we're the least racist, thus acknowledging that there is racism in this country. We might not be having people in not incarceration, in basically concentration camps like the Uyghur Muslims in China. However, we have our own problems, such as innocent African American males being shot just because of the color of their skin. However, people hear that and say, we're the least racist, racism is gone. And we need to be more vigilant at detecting these phrases that are creating false ideologies.
Yes, thank you.
Sorry.
Sorry, yeah.
I saw a question in the chat. Somebody asked, how do we train out these ideals? And I think Jordan touched on that a little bit, but I think it's really important to address. We use our voices. Things like this happen not even just in physical spaces, but on social media and the news. And you can't, untrain like somebody's moral beliefs, but you can definitely show them that it's not okay. If you have been wronged as a minority, you should not be the one that's uncomfortable. You need to make the person who made you uncomfortable know that what they did is not okay. So standing up and using your voice and being strong is honestly the best way to sort of untrain these ideals, is just stand up, make everyone know that it's not okay, make people know that there needs to be a change and it needs to happen now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Everyone, I think we have a really good understanding now of what the problem looks like in our community and in our nation. We understand that there has been progress. Older generations trailblazed, and we're so thankful. Their boldness inspires us. But like Jordan mentioned, racism has evolved. It looks different. It's in education, sports, businesses. It's prevalent, and that doesn't mean it's always blatant. So thank you everyone. And we're on to the next section, which is solutions. But first we have another poll question, and it is, do you believe that discrimination is a serious issue in our community? We'll see those answers everyone has in a couple minutes. Yeah, you have about 2 minutes to answer that. The first question is, what can students do to affect change in their communities?
One of the projects that myself and some of the other panelists here have been working on is a movement called Diversify Our Narrative. And I think that Jordan and Nia kind of mentioned that before, but it's basically a movement that seeks to implement more diverse and anti-racist texts into the curriculums of English and history classes at our school. So for literature classes, we've compiled a list of books that should be read by students at each grade level, and these texts are written by people of color about people of color. And for history classes, we're pushing to implement more assignments or activities that address the perspectives of people of color for the events taught in the unit. And so, for example, like if students are required to learn a unit about the Revolutionary War, We want at least one assignment or activity in the unit for students to learn what people of color or minority groups were doing or experiencing at that same time period. So we've written and released a petition outlining our specific demands, and so far it has a little over 300 signatures. And we're planning on presenting our proposals and our petition to the school board on September 9th, so next Wednesday.
I am also a member of Diversify Our Narrative at Clayton Valley, so I want to talk about it a little as well. And also somebody in the chat asked if they could have links, and at the end, I think we're going to share them. But one of our biggest goals in Diversify Our Narrative is that we want everything we're working for to be absolutely mandatory for teachers, because one administrator pointed out that some teachers may already do this. And while that is true, we want every teacher to have to do this. We don't want it to be an option for them, because if we give them the option, then maybe at the end of the year when they run out of time for that last book, it's the book written by a person of color that they cut out. Or when they don't have enough time before a unit test in history, they cut out the events about people of color. And we don't want that to be an option, because as we've all already talked about, being educated about minorities and people of color is so important. So we definitely want to push to make that absolutely required for all teachers.
I am the president of the Mount Diablo Acalani chapter of GENEP, and we are a student-led organization addressing the vast array of inequities in our education system. And we are partnering up with Diversify Our Narrative, Clayton Valley, and the Diversify Our Narrative chapters of both the Mount Diablo Unified School District and the Acalani High School District. And when I look at it, right now, what we need to do is, as they've all touched on, is get more diverse curriculums implemented into our schools, because we are at an age where, even for us, there is still a chance for children to be showed what society actually looks like. Because when you try to tell someone what society looks like and show that mirror to them when they are 30, when they are 40, it is nearly all but lost. However, if you can get to those people when they are 3, when they are 4, you can stop racism before it even starts. You can keep the Pandora's box from opening for generations to come.
Yes, thank you. Those are some incredible programs. And you're so right. It is not optional to be inclusive and to address the diversity in our community. We students, the next generation, need to be given the chance to come to terms with our history and look to a brighter future. And to the next question, it is, what drove you to start conversations about race and discrimination? How was it calling people out?
I can speak on this one. So in my family, it's always been like a norm to kind of talk about racism, discrimination against the LGBT plus community, against religion, and all that stuff. I mean, it's always been a normal conversation, but I haven't really talked much about it with some of my friends. I mean, some of my friends it's easier to talk about. Some of my friends it's easier to just not really talk about it, and it's not really brought up. But I started to talk about it more in the beginning of my sophomore year. There was this guy in my weights class, and the weights class is like mostly made up of guys, so you don't usually expect a girl to be in that class. And after the first few days, he came up to me and he asked why I was in the class. And I said I just wanted to be in the weights class and all that good stuff. And he said, well, it's because you're not really flirting with any of the guys. And I was like, yeah, it's fine. And it somehow led to the conversation of one of my friends who was a girl who had a girlfriend at the time. And he said, without even like thinking about how it would offend me, he said, oh, so she's a dyke. And me being a member of the LGBT community, it hurt. And I wanted to tell him off about it. So I pulled him aside and I said, dude, that's not okay. And after that, after I had spoken to him about it, he was a lot more careful with the things he said, because I don't think he realized before how much that would hurt me or hurt anyone else around. So I think we just have to start by talking to other people who may just be uncomfortable or nervous about the subject.
What drove me to start talking about, problems with racism and discrimination was I was just fed up. You know, when it started at 6 and kept going, and I'm 16 now, it became annoying and obsessive. It's the microaggressions for me. Even at school, coming from my teachers, reading To Kill a Mockingbird, and every time the N-word came up, she would stare in my eyes and say the word. She would force kids to say the N-word because it's in the book. It's part of the curriculum. No, racism is not part of the English curriculum. That's you. We need to figure out how to eliminate that from the school setting because it made me uncomfortable and I was stuck with her for the whole year. 8th grade, my friend came up to me, dapped me up, and was like, "What up, my nigga?" I'm not your nigga. Like, I'm Jordan. That's my name. And it was a week before 8th grade promotion. I so badly wanted to punch her just because it hurt to be called that from someone I've been friends with practically my whole life. Some other kid was wondering why I got so angry when she said that. And so he said it again. I had to walk away and had to have my friends pull me away because I was so angry and fed up with all of that pent up energy from hearing it all the time. It's constant. And I finally was done. So when I heard about this, I was like, at first I was unsure, but then I was like, this is great. I need people to finally hear my story and hear what it is that I have dealt with. Someone will say something and say, "Oh, it's just a joke." But that's not something to joke about. A joke is funny. Where in that sentence or statement was something funny? And kids need to get that through their mind. I don't care how young they are. Words hurt. We say sticks and stones may break our bones, but words will never hurt us. It hurts. And they need to learn that.
I want to kind of piggyback off that a little bit. It was sort of a similar experience for me of just being absolutely fed up. I started realizing it during all of the protests in July. I kind of mentioned that earlier, but I was just uncomfortable in so many situations. And I really started to question why that was. Because the fact of the matter was, people were calling me slurs, my friends slurs, my family slurs. People were, using microaggressions or being blatantly racist. And I was just accepting that as a fact. But why should I have to be the one who's uncomfortable? So I started questioning that, and I was done with that. I shouldn't have to be uncomfortable. You all should not have to be the one who's uncomfortable. So I started speaking out against people. I started getting rid of the fear and the discomfort. And Jordan touched on this a little bit, people making jokes. I've had a lot of people ask me, what do you do if someone makes a racist joke or an otherwise insensitive joke? I started asking people, how is that funny? Explain it to me. Because a lot of the time, the joke is meant to make you uncomfortable, but by asking them to explain it to you when it's not funny, that makes them uncomfortable and it makes them understand it's not okay. So ultimately, I was just done with being uncomfortable. And I think all of us have felt the same thing.
I totally agree with that statement, Nia, and how it's uncomfortable when people call you these names. I remember I was playing basketball with a couple of my friends, and one person just called me or just said, "I got Kunlin covered." And he was referring to me because it was just like an Asian name. They called me. And I just stopped after that. That made me really uncomfortable. And no one stood up for me. And they just kept on playing and that sort of thing. I've heard these, it's not like this is an isolated incident. It's where I've been hearing these names throughout all my life. And I texted him afterward. I just said, "Hey, that's like really bad what you said. It made me really uncomfortable." But fortunately, he apologized, and I feel like he meant it because he sounded very sincere. But that's just a thing where you have to call out people when people make statements like that. I feel like what if I didn't do that? I feel like he would just call more people names and that sort of thing and hurt them internally. Maybe they wouldn't have called him out. That's what's important about calling people out. It's scary sometimes, especially when they're close friends, but it just takes like one conversation to change their perspective for the better.
Yeah, Jason, going off that, like you have to call people out, and that one conversation really does help. But the when you first start doing it, there's just so much pushback, and it's like almost impossible to like get through it. I've lost like probably 4 or 5 friends just because like I couldn't have a conversation about it with them. They just wouldn't really accept like a conversation. They just wanted to continue saying what they said, you know and yeah, when I first started doing it, I'm going back to talking about pushback. Like I was called an N-word lover because I told them not to say the N-word, like a horrible word, and they called me that. And then I was also called a libtard because of other things, like just because I told them not to say like inflammatory remarks that hurt people. And at first it was just me by myself, like kind of making this pushback. But then like once I started calling people out, more people that I knew started calling people out, because it is a chain reaction of like allyship. Once people start realizing what's going on and realizing the harm and realizing the bad that's like happening in normal conversations, like they actually start to take notice and they change the narrative of what's happening. So if you just like believe that you can make a difference, and then you actually call people out, you know it'll get better for everybody. So you just got to be confident that if you stick with it, it'll start a chain reaction to better everybody in every way possible.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate a little bit of what Jason and Thomas kind of said. I think a lot of times you can hear people in Clayton saying things like there's not racism in Clayton, or like they didn't even experience it until late in high school. And I think one of the reasons for that is, I mean, I don't really know if this is a real thing, but there's like undercover racist people who know how you are going to handle a certain situation. So they know if you're going to be against their comment or if they're going to be in support of it, and they'll hold back what they really think until they're in a community where they feel like their ideas are accepted. And it isn't until they like let a slur slip too easily in a conversation, or they say something blatantly racist, that you kind of can start to put it together and make connections between them and their past actions, or their current opinions. But this comes back to what Thomas and Jason were saying, is not speaking out against what they're saying isn't the same as speaking out. If you don't speak out, they're either going to think that you support them and you're just not going to give them, you're not going to verbally commit your support, or they're going to think that, you can be walked over and that it doesn't matter what they say because you're not going to do anything. And yeah, like Thomas said, and so did Jason, it can be really uncomfortable to call the first person, the second person, any amount of people out. But, it's not about your personal experience in the moment. It's about the personal experience of every person that comes after you. Or, I'm a white person, so I'm going to be upset and I'm going to be offended, but it's not a direct attack at me personally if somebody were to call me a slur. So I have to be able to put away what's going to make me uncomfortable for a second to make my friends and my community members comfortable for the rest of their lives.
Casey, before you start, real quick, to add one more thing. I have brought up the, kids saying the N-word to the administration at my school, and it took them, I think, 1 to 2 weeks to get back to me on it. The one of the vice principals brought me into his office, and he asked me what he should do about the situation. I shouldn't have to tell an adult or anybody what they have to do in a certain situation. And so, like we've said multiple times, the older generations have failed us. At the end of the day, they have. And in that setting, I was was shocked. I was confused. I don't know what to say. Like, what do you want me to want you to do? I just wanted to bring it up to your attention so you know what is happening in your school, so you are not blinded by it. And so we as kids also need to hold the adults at a high standard. They should be able to approach the situation greater than we can. That's it.
Thank you. Great point, Jordan. And from what we've heard, sometimes it's being hurt, insulted, angry, fed up is what drives you to call people out. And sometimes the experience is scary, uncomfortable, and sometimes it's rewarding. It works sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't. But silence is complicity, and it is so important to have those talks. And we hope that by being the person to do that, you can make it easier for the next person and the next person, so that we can stop the cycle. The next question for this topic is, how do you communicate effectively about sensitive topics? How do you do so with adults, your peers? Are there generational barriers?
I'll take this one. So I touched on it a bit earlier, but I started an Instagram account to communicate with fellow students at Clayton Valley. It started off to just talk about racial discrimination that goes on in the schools and, students' unique experiences, and sort of educate each other on current events. But it's broadened since then to all sorts of, issues that are sadly very commonly faced on our campus. So I have little polls that I put out for people to get sort of like some statistics. And then we talk about that as a group. And I'm so thankful that we have a really interactive following, and all of the students are really involved and communicative about their issues and what they want to be talked about. Out of about 50 or so students that were interviewed within the first week of our account, 80% of them said that they've faced racism on campus from a student or staff member, and about 91% said they faced sexism, and about 70% said that they faced homophobia. And these numbers are huge, even for just a small percentage of the student body interviewed. For that many of them to have been affected by these issues without even knowing the questions beforehand going into this is really disheartening to see. So we definitely are trying to bring those numbers down. On the account, we talk about news, we take student questions and stuff on things that they, maybe are embarrassed to ask teachers or adults in their lives. And we ultimately just have the conversations that people are usually uncomfortable to have.
Totally agree that Instagram and different social medias are great ways to communicate. And so I think the best way to communicate topics regarding that are more sensitive is treat them with respect. You can't really bash someone's own views just because of their ideologies. But I also think a good way, or a good idea, is to know when to not get involved. I remember one great example was when an Instagram page called CBCA Just Republicans tried to follow me. And I have no issue regarding that. You're entitled to your own thoughts. But I remember in their bio, it was just like, I want to debate and argue with other people. So their main thing was they wanted to debate opposing views. And so sure, that was good. But also in one of their posts, it said, he specifically stated that if you try and debate me, I will win. And so I feel like that's not a debate. That's just crushing another person's views. That's an important example, because you need to know when you should not get involved, especially with those people, because you can't change a person's mind if their mind doesn't want to change. And the way I try to communicate my values is through Clayton Valley's student-run newspaper called The Talon, and where we really target different social justice issues in our community and through articles. And I feel like that is a better way, because it treats others with respect and not bashing opposing views.
You guys are completely right. I think you guys were touching on the subject of going into things not expecting to change minds. Nia, you talked about that a little earlier. And just treating these issues with respect, because this isn't something you can change in a day, and tenacity and grit and just continuing to be open and engage is what will change these issues in our community. So thank you. The last question for our discussion tonight is, how can the greater community get involved? What can adults do to support the work that you guys are doing?
So personally, I think that adults need to acknowledge what actually goes through a Black person's mind, or at least my mind, when I get into the car. I am nervous about what is going to happen. Am I going to make it to my destination? Am I not? If my sister's in the passenger seat, if I get pulled over and for whatever reason I have to step out of the car, what is my sister going to do? Who's going to tell my parents if I get shot? All of those things go through my mind every single time I get into the car. And I think people just need to not debate what I'm going through, but just listen. They just have to listen. So these, organizations and groups you guys are, running and a part of, when they go and listen and hear what you guys are talking about, they will then understand and get a grasp on what it is that we as kids go through. We are kids. At the end of the day, we are kids, and we have gone through so much already in our lives. I've had people say, "Oh, slavery was a long time ago," or "I'm not my great grandparents. I'm not racist." We still wear the scars that are on our backs that our ancestors did. All of the hatred that has been embedded into this country still is prominent and still affects us.
I agree with Jordan on that. I mean, when I'm in the car with my brother and driving, part of me wonders if, let's say, we got pulled over, if something's going to happen to him, because he's a guy, he's mixed, and I worry for him. I don't want to have to get in the car with him and worry about that. And it's so many other little things that come up with it. And I think we can work to include people in conversations about it instead of just talking to each other about it. I feel like we should include all of our friends in it. Maybe the friends who aren't entirely comfortable talking about it, talk about it in groups, in safe environments, so people feel comfortable asking questions and understanding and learning about what it is that they can do.
I just want to say that I really agree with that. And I think that adults, the best thing they can do is listen and talk to people, because I know lots of people grow up never talking about racism in their family, or never talking about homophobia or all these things in their family because it's uncomfortable. But when kids grow up never hearing about these things, that's how they grow up ignorant. And that's how they grow up and they don't understand the effects of their words they have on people. And I was very lucky that I grew up in a family that taught me that racism was bad, but so many people that didn't happen to them. And I think that that's just the most important thing that adults can do for us, is to help us, because like Jordan said, like, we're all kids, and the adults need to take on the role to teach us and to help us learn, so that we don't grow up not understanding or grow up and being ignorant or whatever.
Yeah, I actually wanted to piggyback off of that exact same topic. And it's really about, like, education begins at home when your child is young, and everything that they learn in your household, they're taking out with them to the world. And I was raised by a very open and talkative family. My mom was a therapist, so it didn't matter if I came to her with questions about sexuality or gender or race or religion. Anything I asked, she would answer me as openly as she could in like an age appropriate context. And that allowed me to remain curious and keep asking important questions without feeling stifled in my own home environment where we can ask those kind of questions. And I think that your kids look up to you more than you might realize they do. And I think a lot of people are worried that if they have these serious conversations young, that their kids are going to get confused or they're going to not understand anything. But that's what your role as a parent is, because if your kids are confused, they're going to go to you first. They want to talk to you about what their opinions are and clarify their thoughts with you. And if you don't support them in that action, then they're just going to turn to their classmates or their friends. And honestly, their friends give any views. Even if they're young, they could have the beginnings of different like racist ideologies. And it just depends on who your kids hang out with. Even if you're raising your kid the way that you see is fit, if you aren't helping them through those early steps, they're going to get opinions that might not be what you want them to learn from kids in their classes. And that's just the truth of how we all were raised and grew up and learned.
So something else that I like to add on to that is for you to educate your kids, that means that we as parents, you would need to be fully educated on these issues too. You cannot just, just play into fear that might be justified. So one of the main examples that I look at is you will possibly see on the news all of these stories about law and order being breached in American society. However, don't just look at that and be scared. Think about why people are going to these extents, because when we look at law and order, I believe it was Van Jones who said this, there are multiple aspects of law and order. You have law and order in the streets with the rioters and protesters and all that. You have law and order in policing, and you have law and order in the justice system. And only one of those is being brought up. So as adults who are going to have to teach your children about these pressing issues, you're going to need to understand that it is more than just law and order in the streets. You need to understand why people are going to these extents, why they feel justified in doing this. And once you are able to understand why that is happening, you will be able to finally teach your children why that is happening, and we will finally be able to grow as a society. On top of that, we're going to have to get more active and make change. Performative activism does not lead to change. We're going to need to sign more petitions, email your local legislators, do anything you can to make a change instead of just posting things on social media and just saying this is terrible. Because if you believe it's terrible, then we need to make a change.
And aside from just teaching your children, you guys touched on this a little bit, but your kids are going to go out and they're going to learn things, different views on a bunch of different topics from a bunch of other people. And they're going to experience their own things and live their own lives. And I think as an adult in general, but also as a parent, it's your responsibility to listen to our experiences and to listen to what we have to say. It can be very difficult to sort of put yourself in someone else's shoes, but ultimately that's what needs to happen. When we talk about the older generations failing us, I think that's what it leads down to, is people throwing it off as we're just kids, we don't understand anything. But when we come to you and when we explain to you the way things are for us, it's your responsibility to listen.
One more thing to add. In psychology, there's this thing called the just role phenomenon. And basically, it's when we blame the victim. If somebody was walking in a bad part of town and got shot, he shouldn't have been there, or wrong place, wrong time. And with all these, shootings by police happening, and when they aren't happening, we tend to say, oh, well, he had a criminal record. He abused his wife, or blah, 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 this and this and that. Just because they've done wrong in their past doesn't mean that they were in the wrong then. I was reading something. This guy, Stephen Clark, on March 18th, 2018, he was in the back of his grandma's backyard on his phone, and the cops were canvassing the neighborhood and for some guy that was breaking in car windshields. They saw him on his phone and shot him 20 times in his own backyard. Before attending to him, they searched the yard and looked for what they thought was a gun, and then later said they thought he had a crowbar. After they didn't find anything, they then turned over his body and realized that it was a phone. When we have these conversations in our own households and say, oh, wrong place, wrong time, he was a bad guy, he deserved to die, and your kids overhear that, whether they're playing with blocks, puzzles, watching TV or cartoons, they overhear you, and that is engraved into their memory and minds. And later, when they become young adults and adults, they remember, oh, he was a bad guy. Even the people we think of as bad people or good people can either be the opposite.
I think that also brings the idea that you have to be an ally when someone is like facing oppression, that sort of thing. I remember when I was in my PE class, this girl just kept on squinting her eyes at me, and this was due to like the Asian stereotype of having small eyes, and that was going on for like months, and none of my peers said anything. In fact, one of them even like joined in. So it was just because she influenced others because of the way she acted, and I feel like you need to be an ally. You need to stand up for those people. I unfortunately was not strong enough to stand up for myself. And I feel like realizing that these types of events that are going on in our communities, our schools, and maybe even our households is the first step to stop this racism going on.
I think that the adults and the other members of the community should take a step back and realize that the history textbooks and all of the lessons they learned were outdated, embellished, and they just completely ignored the social injustices that happened throughout in America's entire history. What the community needs to do is just support us, I think. Like, I completely agree with Kaylee. You know, I feel like it really does stem from the parents. That was an idea that I had never really thoughts of before. You know, I feel like if parents are there for the kids and they teach them the right values, they won't learn it from their classmates. So I feel like that's a very important thing. So adults definitely need to be, you know, taking charge and taking like responsibility for their kid and their actions, and just supporting them by being there for them, talking through them, and not making them closed-minded. I really completely agree with, you know, allowing them to be curious about the world. And then important by teaching your kids to be loving and accepting of all. That's what I kind of wanted to talk about, because I feel like that's the most important thing, you know. I know we all like love our community, and I know all parents and all members of the community want to make it a better place. But, you know, the question I want to bring up is, how can like adults, you know, say they love the community if they completely ignore, you know, the issues of it, if they completely ignore one certain demographic of it? Like, you can't say you love the community if you completely are oblivious to one certain group. So I feel like if they really do care, then they, you know, they put a big effort into educating themselves and teaching their children the right values. And another thing is like with educating yourselves, like I feel like especially in Clayton, it's so polarized because you got one side, you got the other side. And, you know, there's so many lies that there's almost no truth from either of these. And I think of it as like the gray area. If you really want to find the truth, you have to read one article, read the other, see both sides, and actually find your own kind of common sense in it. You know, if you want your kids to be educated and you want them to have, you know, their own ideas that aren't pressed on them, you know, I feel like that's the best way to go. You know, just be loving and accepting of them, supporting us, supporting what we're doing, and just being an ally with us, you know, taking charge and, you know, standing up for what you believe is right.
A lot of you guys have touched on this, but I think one of the best things that adults can do is just encourage our desire to learn and to never sweep things under the rug because they think that we're too naive or too young to understand what's going on. I think a lot of young people are more mature and understanding than I think adults give them credit for. So I think adults need to recognize and respect that and give us honest answers when we ask for them.
So true, guys. You touched on so many great things. Hate lingers, and it has in our country. And what we need from the community, from the adults around us, is to listen to us, like they are now. Thank you for being here. Compassion, just walking a few moons in our shoes, supporting us, being an ally, having conversations with us young, and being aware of your own biases, because we all have them. The thoughts, views, and actions of the adults around you do shape who you are. And we need you guys to fully support, fully encourage us to learn and be better. With that, the results of our last poll question are 95% believe that discrimination is a serious issue in this community, and that is so heartening. 1% said no, 4% said somewhere in the middle. I'm so happy that the vast majority understand the problems that we see, the problems that we want to get better, because they're all of us. They're all of our responsibility to understand. And with that, it's going into our Q&A section. So I have a few questions lined up, and feel free to put more in the chat. The first one is, do you wish you grew up around more people who look like you? Or what are the pros and cons of growing up in Clayton as a minority? Any of our panelists want to take those? One of those?
I'm smiling, but I would love to answer this question. I talked about it probably 25, 365 days of the year with my sister. There are pros and cons to growing up in a place where you don't see people that look like you. I know I do act differently when I'm with my cousins versus if I'm at school or at work, but it's because I'm comfortable and I feel at home. The cons to not, seeing people that look like you are out of touch with reality, because when you do see a setting of a bunch of people that look like you, I got frightened. I was sitting at Safeway and I called Mom. I was in the car. I was like, Mom, there's a bunch of Black people here. And I was like, wait, I'm Black. I forgot that I was Black because I'm not around people that look like me. And yes, it's okay to laugh because it was funny, but at the same time, it's saddening that I was so out of touch with reality, with myself, that until I looked down at my hands, I realized that I was the same color of the people I was afraid of. The pros to, being around people that don't look like you is diversity. You get to learn their perspective, how they differ from your perspective, and just the overall difference of the way they live life.
Yeah, going off of what you said, I feel like, Clayton is, it's predominantly white, and I kind of feel like I wish that it wasn't, because I feel like you were saying, like the more diverse it is, like the more experiences that you get, and the more accepting you are as a person. I remember when my brother came back from college, he knew this one guy, and he was like, at the start of college, he was he'd grown up in kind of like a very, very kind of closed-minded area and community, and he like had these kind of he kind of leaned more towards hate rather than acceptance. And then after 1 year of college, because he had met so many new people and so many people from like so many backgrounds, he actually like began to see their perspectives, and he started to become like a new person in a way. And I feel like I wish that our community was more diverse, just on that like basis right there.
Thank you. You guys are both right. Positive exposure to racial diversity is so important, whether you're the minority or the majority. It helps you get a better perspective on the world, a more broad and expansive. And so that's why it's important to have these talks and to realize that there is some diversity in your community and ways to be a part of it and support it. The next question is, what are you or young people, the next generation of leaders, going to do to advance the concept of inclusion? Most people start out with ideals, but then sacrifice those ideals for a job, money, income. Can you stick to your message for a lifetime given these pressures?
I can take this, or at least part of this. I feel like a lot of us have goals that we want to incorporate into our future. And I think that's what everybody should be doing. I don't think that there's necessarily this idea that you can either, fix the issues you want to in society or go into the job you want to do. Like I want to be an OBGYN, but one of the reasons I want to do that is because there's a disproportionate amount of Black female deaths during childbirth, and there's a lot of health issues that arise that are unnecessary and are disproportionate to the white community. And it's just because people in the profession either aren't as educated about like Black reproductive health as they should be, or they just don't understand that there might be some differences that they need to consider. And it's those ideas that you can go into your field and bring with you all the like ideals that you want to change. And it's not necessarily that you have to sacrifice your career in order to make the world a better place. It's that as you go through your life and as you achieve what you want to achieve, make sure that you're not forgetting about all the values that you have as well.
I'd like to sort of piggyback off that. At school right now, I'm trying to get some new solid programs implemented and actually take these ideas into, concrete physical things that we can see actually making a change. I'm trying to get tolerance and sensitivity training for staff and students, get some anti-sexual assault and anti-bullying stuff implemented, change the sex ed curriculum. And a lot of people that I've talked to, a lot of adults have asked me, like, what do I plan to do about that stuff after school? And sort of like Kaylee said, I want to go into public interest and public interest law. And there, anything you want to do right now, any idea you have, you can definitely take that with you. It's not a matter of a life of wealth or a life of saving people. You can definitely take what you want in your heart and apply that throughout your entire life, whether it be in small ways or major ways. It's all going to make the difference.
Yeah, tackling what both of you guys kind of said, it's not one or the other. You have to be able to take what you've learned in your past and bring it to your career and your job in the future. Like earlier, I want to be an FBI agent. If I can, help change the system from the outside, the inside is the best place I can do it. I'm never going to let go of everything I just said. Like that is a part of me forever. And if people don't see that, or if it's a problem for them, that shows that there's a problem in the world. It's unjust, and we have to be able to fix that. So bringing everything that I've learned, good and bad, to the future in my career is exactly what should happen. It shouldn't be one or the other. You should be able to bring both of them together and be allowed to continue your career of choice.
So true. You can do both. What we want everyone to understand is that inclusion is such an important issue that it's non-compromisable. It's not something that we as a nation should get to put to the side anymore. The time is now, and it has been for a while. The last Q&A question that we have is sort of a definition. What is performative activism?
I don't want to like hog the mic, but performative activism, I would define it as, honestly, I'd sort of relate it to trend setting. You see with the Black Lives Matter movement, a lot of celebrities treating it like a trend, changing their profile pictures on social media to Black bubbles, and for one day posting Black Lives Matter and then going back to all fun and games and completely erasing important things that are happening. You see people going to protests just for photo ops. you see people saying they support Black Lives Matter, yet ignoring every petition they see and every call for help and call for action that they see. And that is one of the most detrimental things to activism, really, because a movement is almost as much as its image in a way. People care about a movement and take it seriously if they see that the followers of the movement are taking it seriously. But in performative activism, you see people claiming to be followers, but just doing it for their own publicity and for their own personal gain.
The best way I would define it is somebody posting on Instagram, some post about Black Lives Matter, and then me asking them, hey, do you want to go to that protest later? And then they're like, nah, no, I'm okay. That's basically that is what performative activism is.
So when I look at performative activism, I kind of view it as bandwagon activism. So one of the popular things at a certain time was Blackout Tuesday, and at the time there were substantially more hashtag Blackout Tuesdays than there were signings for the largest petition to have the officers who were responsible for the death of George Floyd. There were at least, I think it was 13 million more hashtags showing Blackout Tuesday than there were petitions. If those people had signed that petition, maybe those officers would have been brought to justice earlier. For all those people who are posting these Justice for Breonna Taylor things, yet they don't email the local DA, they don't sign petitions calling for justice to be met. That is the epitome of performative activism. And in a way, it is just as bad as the racist institutions in society, because very much like dog whistle racism, it seems like everything else is okay. However, in reality, the problem is still there.
I have one quote. It's from The Hate You Give, and people like us in situations like this become hashtags, but they rarely get justice. And I remember reading that a couple of days ago, and just hearing all the definitions, I remembered it, and it's true. People see a movement, but they don't realize the importance of it. Hashtag justice, or hashtag justice for Breonna Taylor, or hashtag justice for George Floyd, hashtag I can't breathe. But you guys aren't doing anything for it. I'm not sure exactly how long it's been, but the officers that have killed Breonna Taylor have not been brought to justice. So all of the hashtags people post, hashtagging something is not going to change that it actually happened. We need action and people to step up and step forward and acknowledge that this is a problem. It shouldn't happen. So stop hashtagging and start signing petitions.
So true, all of you. Everyone wants to be part of a movement, and I hope that everyone can be into activism and social justice, but it is not easy. These issues are long-seated, long-rooted, and social media can make it seem like just posting is enough. When, as you guys said, action is what we need. We need lasting change, and sincerity is what does not show through in performative activism. And that's what we really need. Okay, well, that's the end of our Q&A, so we're gonna close out. This is everyone's issue. Inclusion and diversity is a problem that all of us have a responsibility to solve. Panelists have given so much evidence that there is a problem. We've given solutions. And many of you have shown up to listen and engage with us, and we are so appreciative. We have hope that things can get better. And so we leave you here with one last poll question. And it's asking what you will do to diversify the narrative, to help us, to support the young people who want to make this a better community and a better nation. Again, I'm so proud of the panelists for being here and being honest and brave. I would like to end with the final words of a social justice activist that we had who passed on not too long ago. When historians pick up their pens to write the story of the 21st century, let them say that it was your generation who laid down the heavy burdens of hate at last, and that peace finally triumphed over violence, aggression, and war. So I say to you, walk with the wind, brothers and sisters, and let the spirit of peace and power of everlasting love be your guide. John Lewis. Good night, everyone. You can see all the links for the various projects that the panelists are a part of. We would love your support. Thank you for being here.